going deep on this one. You guys sent in some seriously interesting articles, and let me tell you, the words market crash and AI revolution are practically jumping off the page.
Yeah, no kidding. We've got a potential power shift happening right in front of our eyes. In the world of AI, that is.
Exactly. And that could mean some big changes, not just for investors, but maybe for like everyday life, you know?
Absolutely. It's a fascinating situation. On the one hand, you have this company most people have never even heard of, DeepSeek. They're suddenly making waves.
And on the other hand,
global markets are, well, freaking out a little. The big question is, are these two things related? And if so, how?
Okay, so let's break this down. DeepSeek first. In the simplest terms, what is it and why should we care?
Basically, DeepSeek is a Chinese company, and they've developed this open-sourced AI service. People are comparing it to big names like ChatGPT.
Mm-hmm.
But what's really got everyone's attention is the fact that they're claiming to get similar results, but at a fraction of the cost.
Okay, now that's where I need you to stop for a sec.
Sure.
When you say fraction of the cost, how much cheaper are we talking here? Give us some numbers.
Well, reports are saying DeepSeek developed their latest model for something like $6 million.
$6 million?
Yeah. Now compare that to the hundreds of millions, even billions, that companies like, say, OpenAI have been pouring in.
Okay, yeah, I see why people are calling this a disruption. It's a huge difference. But how does this all translate to the stock market taking a nosedive? Like, what happened on January 27th?
Right.
Was DeepSeek single-handedly responsible for, like, what was it? Nvidia losing $200 billion in value.
Well, I'd say it's unlikely that DeepSeek alone caused that, especially, a full 10% drop.
Okay.
But it's definitely a factor. You see, the market reacts to expectations. And DeepSeek coming onto the scene like this has introduced a ton of uncertainty, particularly in the tech sector.
I can imagine.
Think about it. You're an investor. You've put a lot of money into companies like Nvidia, who supply the hardware for all this AI development.
Right.
Then suddenly this new company pops up saying, hey, we can achieve the same results using way less of that expensive hardware.
Yeah, it's got to make you sweat a little.
Makes you question your whole investment strategy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not just about DeepSeek's technology itself. It's the ripple effect it's having. It's got the potential to completely reshuffle the whole AI landscape.
That's a great way to put it. And that's why investors are getting nervous.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, this is like the potential democratization of AI. If it's suddenly so much cheaper to develop, doesn't that mean smaller companies, startups, maybe even individual researchers who couldn't afford it before can now get in the game?
That's one of the most exciting aspects of all this. And it's exactly why Mark Andreessen compared it to the launch of Sputnik.
Oh yeah, he called it a Sputnik moment, right?
Exactly. Just like the Soviet Union launching that satellite kicked off the space race, DeepSeek could spark a global race to innovate in AI, with new players coming out of, well, anywhere, really.
That's pretty wild. But let's not forget the other side of that coin.
What do you mean?
Cheaper AI could also mean easier access for people who, well, let's just say they don't have the best intentions. Could this tech end up in the wrong hands?
That's a valid point, and something we definitely need to explore further, because this potential for, let's say, misuse adds another layer of complexity to this whole situation.
Okay, so we've got DeepSeek shaking up the world of AI and possibly playing a role in that stock market dip. But let's zoom out a bit. We know the market overall lost, what was it, about 9 lakh crore rupees? That's something like 108 billion US dollars, all on January 27th.
One day.
Yeah, one day. Now that's significant, right?
Yeah.
Can we really say with certainty that DeepSeek is the main culprit here?
Well, you have to remember that global markets rarely react to just one single event. It's always a mix of factors, right?
Right.
And in this case, we've got a few other things happening at the same time that are, kind of a big deal.
You talk about like the trade war brewing between Colombia and the US and all the talk about a possible recession. Those were definitely in the articles you sent.
Right. All of that is adding to investor anxiety, and it could definitely be contributing to this downturn. We can't just look at DeepSeek in isolation.
Okay, so we've got trade wars, recession fears,
Yeah.
and now this DeepSeek bombshell. It's a lot to take in.
It is.
But it also makes me think, if DeepSeek can disrupt the AI landscape like this, does it also mean like a bigger power shift globally? Could this be the start of a new kind of technological Cold War?
Now, that is a question worth exploring. To really understand the implications here, we need to look beyond just like the immediate market reaction and consider the broader geopolitical landscape, We need to ask ourselves, who comes out on top when AI development suddenly becomes so much cheaper?
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork here. We have DeepSeek, this unexpected player, potentially changing the game in AI. Global markets are reacting with a mix of excitement and fear. And we have all this economic and geopolitical tension simmering in the background.
Yeah, it's a recipe for something big. What that something is, that's what we're here to figure out.
All right, so we're all set up for a pretty fascinating discussion.
Buckle up. It's pretty wild to think about, isn't it? How something like the cost of developing AI can send shockwaves through the entire global market.
It is. It really highlights how interconnected our world is these days.
Yeah.
Especially with all the geopolitical and economic tension we're already dealing with.
Exactly. And speaking of interconnectedness, let's circle back to DeepSeek for a second.
Okay.
We talked about its potential to completely shake up the AI world and maybe its connection to those recent stock market dips. But what does all this actually mean for the average person?
Right, that's the important question, right? We can't just get lost in all the market data and the abstract stuff. We need to bring it back down to earth, to how this could impact your everyday life.
That's exactly right.
So how does DeepSeek's arrival potentially affect the person listening to this right now? What are we talking about here?
Well, think of it this way. Imagine a world where developing cutting-edge AI suddenly becomes way cheaper.
Okay.
What does that unlock? We could see this huge explosion of innovation across so many different industries.
Mm-hmm.
It could change everything from, the products you buy to the healthcare you receive, really.
Okay, but give us some concrete examples. How could cheaper AI actually change things, say in the medical field?
Well, imagine AI-powered diagnostic tools that are way more accurate and accessible to everyone. Or personalized treatment plans, based on your specific genetic makeup.
Yeah.
And what about drug discovery happening at warp speed? We could see cures for diseases that right now we think are incurable.
Those are some pretty incredible possibilities, but what about the potential downsides? Right. What about jobs being replaced by AI? And what about the ethics of all this?
Right. Those are definitely valid concerns. And they're things we need to be talking about and, working on solutions for right now. When it comes to jobs, we need to be thinking about retraining programs, upskilling the workforce, creating new opportunities. And ethically, we have to make sure AI is developed and used responsibly. That's key.
So are you saying we need to be having a global conversation about AI ethics? Because right now it seems like everyone's just focused on the tech itself and, the potential profits and maybe even global dominance like you were talking about earlier.
Exactly. That's the conversation we need to be having. And we need to be having it now before this tech becomes so widespread that it's out of our control. We need to consider things like potential bias in algorithms, the potential for misuse by, governments or corporations, and the impact on individual privacy.
It's almost like we're standing at this crossroads.
Yeah.
On one path, you have all this potential for good, for solving some of the world's biggest problems. But on the other path, we've got potential dangers. A future where AI is used to control people, not empower them.
And that's why it's so important for everyone to be informed, to understand this technology and be part of these discussions.
Okay, so we've talked about what DeepSeek could mean for the average person, the good and the bad.
Right.
Now let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about that other big event we touched on earlier. The whole trade war brewing between Colombia and the US.
Yeah, let's unpack that. It's a pretty complicated situation with potential impacts that go way beyond just those two countries.
From what I understand, it started when the US tried to deport some migrant workers back to Colombia, but Colombia wouldn't let the planes land. And that, sparked a trade war. Seems like a pretty extreme reaction, honestly.
It might seem that way at first glance, but you have to understand the history between the US and Colombia.
Right.
It's a long, complicated relationship with a lot of baggage. Drug trafficking, immigration, economic inequality, you name it. This whole incident with the workers seems to have been the final straw. It triggered this conflict that's been brewing for a long time.
It's not just about those specific workers, it's about bigger issues.
Exactly.
Okay, so what about these tariffs the US president is threatening? That seems pretty aggressive, 25% on all Colombian imports, potentially going as high as 50%?
Yeah, it's a pretty bold move, and it could have a big impact on both economies.
50%, that's huge. What kind of products are we talking about here, and how could this affect, the average person, both in the US and globally.
We're talking major Colombian exports,
Yeah.
flowers, coffee, oil. These are things people all over the world use.
Yeah.
If these tariffs go into effect, you could see your morning coffee get way more expensive. Or that bouquet you buy for Valentine's Day, even the gas you put in your car.
So this isn't just some abstract economic thing. It could hit people's wallets pretty hard.
Exactly. And it's not just about the direct impact of those tariffs either. It's the uncertainty it creates for businesses that rely on global trade,
Right.
Disruptions in the supply chain, prices going up and down, all that. It can lead to businesses holding back, delaying investments, and ultimately slower economic growth for everyone.
Right. It's like this domino effect.
Yeah.
One disruption can lead to all these consequences that ripple out through the whole global economy. So how is Colombia responding to all this? Are they backing down?
Well, the Colombian president has come out and criticized the U.S.'s actions, and they're trying to find a diplomatic solution.
Okay.
But they've also hinted at potential countermeasures. And this back and forth has investors worried, which is why the Colombian peso has been dropping lately.
So we've got this trade war heating up, adding even more uncertainty to this, already uncertain global market.
Yeah.
And then there are those recession fears we keep hearing about.
Right.
How does this trade war potentially play into all that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Trade wars, by their very nature, they create instability in the economy, right? They disrupt supply chains, drive up costs, and make consumers less confident.
Makes sense.
All those things can contribute to a slowdown in economic growth, which could push us closer to a recession.
So it's not just about the direct economic impact of the tariffs themselves, it's the overall psychological effect.
Yeah.
Right? That feeling of uncertainty and fear in the markets.
Exactly. And this is where things get really interesting, because we have to consider how this trade war might intersect with the whole DeepSeek situation. On the surface, they seem like separate issues, but if you look closer, there are some potential connections.
Okay, I'm all ears. How do these two seemingly unrelated events connect?
Think about it. The trade war between the US and Colombia is partly fueled by, economic competition.
Right.
Both countries want more influence and a bigger share of the global market. Now bring in DeepSeek, this potential AI powerhouse, and it could shift the balance of power in tech, giving China a big advantage.
So it's like a geopolitical chess match, with AI as a major piece on the board.
Exactly. And this brings us back to that question we posed earlier. Who benefits when AI development becomes much cheaper? Who are the winners and who are the losers?
It's like this multi-dimensional puzzle, isn't it? Economic factors, technological advances, geopolitical tensions, it's all tangled up together.
Exactly. To understand what might happen, we need to look at all the pieces.
So let's recap. We have this trade war going on, potentially pushing us closer to a recession. And we have DeepSeek, this unexpected player, changing the game in AI and maybe even shifting global power dynamics. That's a lot to digest.
It is a lot. But by unpacking these events and seeing how they might be connected, we can start to understand this complex world we live in.
Right. And maybe even more importantly, we can start thinking about how all this might affect our own lives and the choices we make.
Exactly. So let's move on and talk about some concrete steps our listeners can take. Arm ourselves with the knowledge and tools to navigate this whole situation.
Welcome back, everyone. We've been talking about DeepSeek, this Chinese AI company that's making headlines, and how it connects to this trade war and all the talk about a possible recession. It's a lot to wrap our heads around, but that's why we do this, right? We dive deep into these things.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's important to remember that we're not just talking about some abstract ideas here. We're talking about things that could have a real impact on people's lives, including everyone listening right now.
That's a good point. So what about the future? What are some of the scenarios that could unfold? What should our listeners be prepared for?
Well, it's always tough to predict the future, right? But we can use the information we have to explore some possibilities. Let's start with DeepSeek. What if this really is the the Sputnik moment of AI?
That's what Andreessen called it, yeah.
Right, the Sputnik moment. What does that mean for the tech world?
I'm picturing complete chaos. All these companies, the ones who spent billions on AI, suddenly facing a competitor that can do the same thing for way less money. What would that even look like?
It could trigger this huge wave of innovation, almost like an arms race in AI.
An arms race, huh?
Yeah, think about it. If DeepSeek keeps making progress and offering their technology at such a low cost, other companies will have to adapt, right? We might see a shift towards more open-sourced AI, a move away from these proprietary models that have dominated the industry for so long.
So instead of a few big companies controlling everything, AI becomes more decentralized. more collaborative.
Yeah. And that could be a good thing.
How so?
Imagine a world where smaller companies, startups, even individual researchers have access to these powerful AI tools. It could unleash this incredible wave of creativity, new solutions to problems we haven't even thought of yet. It's exciting.
It does sound pretty utopian, I'll admit. But, let's be real. There are always downsides to new technology, especially something this powerful. What are some of the concerns?
Well, one concern is that DeepSeek's technology, or any open source AI for that matter, could be used for, malicious purposes.
Right.
Imagine this powerful AI getting into the wrong hands. It could be used to create autonomous weapons, spread misinformation really effectively, even manipulate people through really sophisticated propaganda.
It's like giving everyone access to a nuclear reactor, right? You can provide clean energy, but if it's not handled properly, it could be a disaster.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to have that conversation we talked about earlier, the one about AI ethics. We need to figure out some ground rules, some regulations for AI development, and no matter who's creating it, we need to make sure it's being used for good, not harm.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So DeepSeek is a bit of a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
It could democratize AI and lead to amazing innovations, but it also comes with some serious risks that we can't ignore.
Right.
Okay, what about that other big issue we've been discussing, the trade war between Colombia and the US? How do you see that playing out?
Well, there are a few possibilities. One is that the two countries eventually sit down and negotiate a compromise. Maybe the US backs off on the tariffs a bit, and Colombia agrees to some concessions on, things like immigration or drug enforcement.
It's a little give and take on both sides.
Yeah, it's like a dance. It wouldn't be a perfect solution, but it would de-escalate things and hopefully prevent more damage to the economy.
But what if they can't find common ground? What if things escalate?
That's definitely a possibility. The US could double down on those tariffs, and Colombia might retaliate with counter tariffs. It could turn into a full-blown trade war, maybe even dragging in other countries.
And that wouldn't be good for anyone, right?
No, not at all. It would mean higher prices for consumers, disruptions in global trade, a lot of uncertainty for businesses. It would be bad news all around.
Okay, let's talk about those recession fears for a minute.
Okay.
How seriously should listeners be taking these predictions? Is a recession really on the horizon, or is it just media hype?
Well, there are definitely some warning signs. Economic growth is slowing down, inflation is going up, and we've got all this geopolitical uncertainty.
Right.
A lot of economists believe that a recession isn't just possible, it's pretty likely at this point.
Not exactly what I wanted to hear, but I appreciate you being straight with us. So let's say a recession does hit. What can people do to prepare themselves, financially?
Well, the first thing is to take a good look at your finances, make sure you have a budget, that you're not spending more than you earn, and that you have some savings set aside for emergencies.
That's good advice in general, right? Recession or not.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But it's even more important when things are uncertain. It's also a good time to review your investments. Make sure you're diversified, not too exposed to risky assets.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket, as they say.
Exactly. And if you're not sure how to do that, don't be afraid to talk to a financial advisor. They can help you come up with a plan that works for you.
Great advice. So we've covered a lot today. DeepSeek, the trade war, recession fears. It's a lot to take in. What's the main takeaway for our listeners? What should they remember as they try to navigate all this?
I think the most important thing is to stay informed, to be aware of what's happening in the world and understand how it could affect you and the choices you make. Don't panic, and don't make any rash decisions based on fear or hype.
Right.
Do your research, talk to experts when you need to, and make decisions that are right for you and your goals.
Good advice. Stay calm, stay informed, and stay in control. And I think it's important to remember that even in uncertain times, there are opportunities. DeepSeek is a good example of that. It shows that innovation can come from anywhere. So stay curious, stay open to change, and be ready for new possibilities.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. It's not about trying to predict the future, it's about being ready for whatever comes next.
Well said. And I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us today.
It's been great being here.
And to you, our listeners, thanks for sending us such interesting articles. We encourage you to keep learning about these topics and be part of the conversation. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep diving deep.